30 years after the wall came down, there's still this fundamental, I would even say it's coming back, this fundamental division in how people will vote and view politics. And I think that in East Germany, it's hard to say why, but people have been hit earlier by the shrinkage of the middle class. The wall might as well still be there.
I'm happy to start our podcast series that touch and check reality with Jörg Luyken, a highly respected Berlin-based journalist known for his spot-on analysis of German government and politics. Thank you so much, Jörg, for being here with me today.
It's a pleasure.
And thank you for being in this emblematic place where, I was here when the wall was crumbling. And I remember I even had a little tool that I was like bringing the wall down together with my other 20-year-olds.
So on the night that people broke through?
On the night that people broke through, I was not here, but I was here in June when I came to Humboldt University with my group of SAIS graduates.
Mm-hmm.
And we were sitting in the east, still the wall was there. And I remember that I told myself, my gosh, if the wall came down, everything is possible. So it was so hopeful. It was a very, very, very hopeful year.
Yeah.
And it was a very, very positive, with great energy generation of us. Yeah, we were thinking we're going to make things better. The 90s were full of good energy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little, I would say, uncomfortable. And relatively surprising for me as an economist who studies behaviors. I'm an institutional economist who studies behaviors, different ways that people decide to operate in the market, to see, for example, that the middle class in Germany and in other European countries and in the first world is shrinking.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there are counters about it. They're saying, well, it's not really shrinking. Things are better than they were 2 centuries ago. But I'm not comparing it with 2 centuries ago. I'm comparing it with 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I'm comparing it with the 90s when the wall came down and we thought, wow, we're going to have these 2 big pieces of the new Germany and the old Germany together, and it's going to be a powerhouse. And it became a powerhouse in the 90s. So give me your views about the reasons of the fact that we have about close to 10% shrinkage of the middle class in Germany.
It's actually quite a good place to be right now, right next to the wall, because this is basically one of the last pieces of the wall that remains in Berlin, and they've obviously kept it as this memorial. But this is the same month that we had the European elections. And the European elections, if you look at a map of Germany and how people voted, the wall might as well still be there, because everything, almost every single constituency to the east side of where this wall once ran, and the inner German order, voted primarily for the AfD, which is a populist right-wing party, and everything to the west voted primarily for the CDU, the center-right traditional party of power in the west of Germany. So 30 years after the war, after the wall came down, you can see that there's still this fundamental, or I would even say it's coming back, this fundamental shift in this fundamental division in how people will vote and view politics. And I think that in East Germany, it's hard to say why, but people have been hit earlier by the shrinkage of the middle class, the fact that Germany is in a situation now where its economy is not growing, that it's a very high-tax society. There's ever more bureaucracy that's being put on people. That's encouraging growth in for family businesses, but it's also for people in the middle classes that they give roughly half of their salary to the state.
Why they give half of the salary in taxes? You mean
in taxes? Yes. So
how much is a percentage there?
well, I mean, I think the OECD said that it's about 48%. Lower incomes, it's less, but you could quite quickly get up into a tax category where you're paying close to half of your income back to the state. And with the government that we've had since 2001, there's increased regulation that's coming in, and that's having an impact on the price of goods, on the price of food. So people are noticing that. I think people are noticing that more in the East than in the West. And that's why you can see that there's still that division is still there. And yeah, on the question of why the middle class in Germany is shrinking, I think it's a combination of those things, that we're in a situation now where the economy isn't growing, wages aren't going up, but inflation is going up and taxes are still high.
So our interest, of course, is to see how, here we call it precariousness, the hustling of people trying to have more jobs to make ends meet. We take that and extend it to informality, meaning lack of security of existence and lack of security of existence of your assets, generates direct fallout of the middle class. You fall out of the system. Mm-hmm. And the middle class for us is not just the system of the formulas that we use, so much the percentage of the mean income of an individual, but it's really the ability of innovating, of growing, of being secure in your home, of sending your kids to school, of retraining yourself if you lose your job and finding a new job. So I noticed that you have a huge housing crisis, which it's become a little surreal for us to understand it outside of this country. And at the same time, you have a very big wave of refugees and immigrants. It's like the number one destinations of traffickers to bring, they call them agents, in the trafficking world. The traffickers are called agents, like travel agents. So it's the number one destinations of bringing those people here. So we travel to Tunisia, and we travel to Greece, and we travel to Latin America, and everyone who wants to cross for a better life, they all want to come to Germany. Yeah. So how do you think, we've seen some homeless people that speak English, are well-educated, used to be high class, and they went middle class, now they're in the streets. What do you think is generating this? Bureaucracy? Pulling people out? Or making them not be able to even access the social security system?
Well, Germany's got very low home ownership rates, and that goes back decades. Since after the war, Germany's always had a heavily regulated rental market, which meant that it often made just as much sense for people to rent a place here as to buy. But maybe since the financial crisis of 2008, and the fact that low interest rates created this housing bubble, we've seen an explosion in the cost of housing, which has made it harder for people to buy properties. And on top of that, you've got all kinds of state regulation, which makes the building of properties more.
Tell me a little bit about that. What would be? I remember in the 90s, in order to sell or to transfer a property right would take about a year. Mm-hmm. But now, well, if you want to build,
I'm not sure about the length of time that it takes to sell a property. I mean, in my own personal experience, that is something that happened quite quickly, quite efficiently. But I mean, one thing that has made it much more expensive to buy a property is the increase in the stamp duty on the land tax that you pay when you acquire a property, and that, I think that's doubled over the past decades. And again, it's due to the fact that local governments here, they need to raise more taxes because there's all sorts of additional requirements that they have to fulfill that come from the federal government or come from the EU. They're also not allowed to take out any tax. They're not allowed to take out any debt.
Oh, really?
Well, since there was a law change in 2009, which basically banned local governments in Germany from running deficits. So what have they done? They need to raise taxes, and so the main way in which they raise taxes, the largest single tax that the local governments in Germany can raise is once they raise on property sales or property purchases. So those taxes have gone up, which, in addition to the fact that housing prices are going up anyway, makes it very unaffordable for the middle class.
So all the forces go towards a peak. That's why you have a housing boom, a bubble. So, and the majority, we've learned the property rights of the way they are split in terms of house ownership.
Mm-hmm.
A big chunk, about a third, is with companies that are shareholding companies, but with the municipality or the state. So if the state cannot take loans to maintain and to build more homes, then you're in a loop.
Well, exactly, and the states have sold off in the early 2000s. I mean, if you look at Berlin, well, Berlin was massively indebted about 20 years ago, and its primary solution to dealing with that debt was to sell off social housing, to sell off state-owned housing. And I mean, as we were saying, people are so desperate to find housing here that they put up posters in supermarkets. They pin posters to these trees.
Asking for
any property. Just if anybody's seen or heard of anything, people just don't know how to find anything because through the normal old channels it doesn't work anymore.
So they have. I also saw that they have like a little advert.
They put off a little advert, describe who they are. Often, if they have children, they try and get the sense of urgency over to other people, and then they'll put their phone number on little strips you can pull off. And you can see if somebody's looking for a place, those phone numbers are still there 2 weeks later. If someone's offering a place, they're all gone within a couple of hours.
And then it says, I saw one that said, if you find a place for a single mother with 3 children, we will pay you €1,000.
Yeah. And that on every single one of these posters, you'll see that they're offering money to anybody. And of course, this creates an incentive for a black market. And so you'll get people who abuse the system by subletting apartments with illegal contracts, or there's other loopholes like putting furniture in it. People will find ways around these systems. So I mean, in Berlin is the German state that's done most to try and bring rents back under control through legislation of basically banning rent increases. But what did it do? It just led to a big black market. It led to landlords looking for loopholes, and then it was actually thrown out by court, but it was clear that it wasn't working. It led to huge rent rises just outside of Berlin. So yeah, it's the fact is the problem here is there's a huge shortage in housing, and that is not being solved. And
then you notice a huge growth of homeless that are not immigrants. There are homeless that are immigrants, Eastern European immigrants. But I mean, I was impressed and surprised. They're so institutionalized. We found actually a tour guide that gives a whole tour about homeless. And he himself being a homeless and how he managed to get out, and how insecure he feels right now because he's in a little house that is completely inappropriate. He's in the black market. He's paying in cash. Doesn't have heating. Doesn't have hot water there. And he's still waiting for the allowance from the Social Security. I also noticed, of course, that there is a level of shame. A level of shame to want to accept that there is such a problem, or even from those people that are hurt by the system, that they fell out of the system, they lost their job and they lost their apartment, they're like one health accident away from losing their apartment, and they finally lost their apartment, right? And they just are they feel ashamed of course, to talk about it, because it's not something that they were brought up in. They were regular regular middle class people, and now they are trying to find out, where they could sleep at night.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I notice also a similar type of shame on the side of authorities, except of course from the tenants association that explained that to us.
Yeah.
How do you?
Well, I think that the problem is largely invisible because you do have in the 10 years that I've lived in Berlin, these homeless camps have emerged in places like in neighborhoods like Kreuzberg underneath the train tracks that didn't exist 10 years ago, and you have these homeless camps there. I think a much bigger problem is this invisible thing of people not living on the street, but living with friends or having to move back in with family. That it's the kind of this creeping fallout of the middle classes, or there's a more gradual thing, and it's invisible. It's not, and it's estimated that I think the German government needs to build 400,000 houses every year to meet this increased demand. And of course, it's people moving into the big cities as well. That is
a combination of forces.
It's a combination of forces, but it's invisible because it's not like Germany's overnight become a poor country. It's just this gradual slip of people who maybe would have had an ambition or the possibility 10, 20 years ago to buy a place, or at least to rent a place that had enough space for their family. And now you'll have, a family with 3 children living in a 2-room apartment instead of one that actually has space.
So tell me, what do you think is the reason for this? I believe, and I have seen in our own methodological analysis, reality check analysis, that informality is contagious, and it's creepingly contagious. When it comes, it sips in underneath. You don't even feel it, and one good day, suddenly half of your population is gone, is out of the system, cannot access it. It's impossible for them to know. It's called asymmetry of information. They do not know how to go about and seek help. And that's simply because they were not in the culture of social security recipients, right? Mm-hmm. But why do you think there is this falling out?
I think the most people aren't falling out of the system. They're falling into the system. That ever more Germans are taking subsidies from the state because they don't have a salary that allows them to pay their own rent completely,
but they cannot really. The ones we found is that they cannot really access it, so they're out in the streets. They're not able to have an apartment.
Yeah.
They're not able to have the apartment allowance. They're not able to. They probably have health access, health insurance, emergency health.
Yeah.
But that's what we noticed, that the homeless are those who they cannot cope the lack of knowledge of how to go about it. And we found out yesterday that there is also a little bit of that there is a little bit of purpose behind it, because if everybody would have known how to access the system so easily, the system would have blocked already, because it's already at its stretch. Mm-hmm. So losing your apartment, you need to go to a 40 square meter apartment or a 50 square meter apartment in Berlin, but there are no such apartments anymore. So what are you going to do? You're going to sit in the street again?
Right, then you
have to go to a homeless shelter.
Yeah, you have to go to a homeless shelter, or I think they provide accommodation in hostels, or you have to move out of the city. But I think as I said, people can tend to just consolidate when they move
with their family.
Yeah, with family, yeah.
If they have one.
How
do you view the future, and what do you, as a person who lives here, who has over 10 years, how do you view the future right now of the first world, of the 30% that is formal, and Germany being the leading G7 country together with the United States?
I think that Germany is facing very big problems, and it's still sort of in this place where things haven't bitten enough that any politician really has the guts to say that larger. I mean, take pensions for example. It's so obvious that one of the reasons why the tax burden in Germany is so high is because the government moves 100 billion euros every single year from the state budget into the
Pension
system. And even that isn't working because, you look at, if you go around the streets in Germany, you'll see pensioners spending the whole day looking for bottles so they can get the little money vouchers back on bottles. You've got a big problem
recycling bottles,
and you've got a big problem here with poverty among pensioners. At the same time, you have a huge amounts of money being transferred from the tax system into the pension insurance system. Those large taxes are causing some, better earners to think about emigrating. How do you, this is a very tangled system. How do you resolve that? Well, probably one way of resolving it is increasing the age of retirement or creating a much more flexible age at which people retire. That is still something that politicians really aren't prepared to openly talk about.
Or reduce the burden of bureaucracy and regulation.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I'm sure that's also part of it. Yeah. And that's a kind of much more gnarly thing to get into. Like, I mean, the German governments every single new German government that comes into power, they'll have a chapter in their manifesto, in their coalition contract, dedicated to cutting bureaucracy.
Oh, I see.
And none of them ever do it. I think the coalition contract we've got now, cutting bureaucracy is mentioned 60 times or something in that whole coalition contract. But the government auditor last year said that bureaucracy is increased to the highest ever level. German governments are addicted.
All indicators show poverty 11.6%. A very high percentage, the highest percentage over 60 years old. Bureaucracy higher than ever before. They tried to actually manipulate the numbers by saying we have reduced the number of laws, but the number of pages per law are extraordinarily high.
Yeah.
So do you see a possibility for a brighter future with conditions, or a gloomier future?
I think that Germany needs a cultural shift. That people associate Germany with efficiency. That's the Germans' kind of national character trait is efficiency. Germany is, at the moment, the most important thing for Germans is fairness, but fairness is obviously a good thing to strive for. But in law, it means they have these huge detailed laws. If it's if it's like welfare payments, each individual welfare payment is treated as an individual case with all these, depending on the number of children, they have the age of the children, they have the.
So that makes it more complicated.
That leads to this massive bureaucracy that's only dedicated to creating the fairest welfare system possible. And there's a cost to that. And I think for a long time, Germans have kind of closed their eyes to the fact that seeking fairness as the kind of ultimate good of governance has massive costs. And though we're seeing increasingly the side effects of what those costs are. And I think that we will definitely have a change of government, and that will shift to the right philosophy on the right, on the center right, with smaller government, with trying to to streamline some of these things. Of course, it's Germany. You're not gonna eradicate the social welfare net, but it needs a change. I think it needs something. Given the demographic problems that are coming to Germany, it needs more than just fiddling. But of course, Germans are used to living in wealth. People notice that they're falling out of the middle class. People notice that they have less real money in their pocket, and that is causing a lot of dissatisfaction. Yeah.
I see. Well, Jörg, thank you so much. I hope that the future will be brighter, but for that to happen, I aim, and we all aim from our side, that the whole G7 recognizes that we're swimming. The 30% is swimming into more and more and more processes, all of them for good reason, but overlapping, fighting with each other, and so on. And they're not really helping the aim they were built for originally. They're not helping the citizen. They're not helping secure the security and the prosperity that we all fought for, secure the property rights that we already have. Instead, it makes it very difficult for us when we fall out of it to go back in.
And I think just one last thing on that is Germany has a particular problem, but you see it as changing slowly. Talking about the wall, and that on the east side now the populists AfD are becoming ever more popular, but in the west they still also have they've definitely over 10% in Poland. But there's a problem that at least the political class tends to look at they never ask themselves what's causing this phenomenon, and they just look at the AfD and say, oh, that's a Nazi party or that's a fascist party. It's a bad thing that this fascist party is there, and then there's discussions about banning it and all of these kinds of things. Not enough thought is given to what establishment parties have done so wrong that means that Germans would consider voting for a party that definitely has fascist elements in it. And that's the AfD will keep growing if as long as there's not fundamental reforms that make people feel like they're getting wealthier again.
Yeah, as you said in one of your articles, an emotional reaction with an economic base.
Right, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again very much. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Actually, it was a pleasure.